Welcome back, Hornets. We're ready for part 4 of the workbook lesson we're doing this week, which is lesson 19 on comparing and contrasting genres. So today we're going to start out on page 212, so make sure that you have your workbook open to page 212. If you need to pause the video and get out your materials, something to write with, go ahead and do that now and come back whenever you are ready. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Like I said before, we're on page 212 and we're going to begin part 4 of lesson 19 today. So, we know the title of lesson 19 is Comparing and Contrasting Genres. So, I have written the title of our lesson up at the top, so I want you to go ahead and do that as well. I have also gone ahead and I've broken down the title for you. We know that comparing means that we are looking for things that are similar, the same, or alike. And we know contrasting is the exact opposite of comparing. If I'm contrasting two things, I'm telling how they are different, how they are not the same. And we are comparing and contrasting genres. So, as you know, we have 5 major genres in literature. We have fiction, nonfiction, drama, poetry, and folklore. So, throughout the whole course of this year, we have talked about each of these genres at least once. But for lesson 19, we are mostly going to be focused on fiction and nonfiction. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at our directions for part 4, our guided practice. So the directions say read the following historical account and historical fiction piece. Use the study buddies and the close reading to guide your reading. Okay, so before we get started, I want to let you know that part 4 is going to be a little bit different than our usual part 4s. So instead of one passage to read, we have 2 passages to read. According to our directions, I have a historical account. We already know that historical accounts are nonfiction, which means that they are going to include real historical details. And we know we have a historical fiction piece as well. And we know historical fiction falls under our genre of fiction, which means that it is not real, it's fake, made up, or at least it's not entirely real. Because as you know, historical fiction, it's fiction, of course, so it's going to have some fabricated details, some stuff that the author made up. But because it's historical fiction, it's a little bit different. We know historical fiction means that it's set in the past, and we know historical fiction in a historical fiction piece, there are going to be some details that are probably actually true, that they are historical details, historical facts, but they're going to be mixed in with fictional elements, which makes it fictional and makes it not real, right? So, we're going to look at 2 different pieces. We're going to look at a historical account and then a historical fiction piece. And when we've done that, we're going to use our study buddies and our close readings to kind of help us analyze each text that we're going to look at today. So, on page 212, the first text that we have to look at is our historical account. So, we've been talking about historical accounts all week, but let's take a minute to kind of refresh ourselves on some of those things that kind of make a historical account nonfiction. So, we know, like I've just said, an historical account is nonfiction, which means that it is real. So, we can consider this an informational text. And we know the purpose of an informational text is to inform the reader. You read it to learn something or to gain information about a topic. So, we also know historical accounts are going to have certain historical details or facts, right? So, if I know that this is a historical account, there are already certain amount of things that I know that I can look for just based on that fact alone. So I know, because this is a historical account, that I can look for um people, so historical figures, right? People of importance. I can probably look for certain dates that kind of go along with whatever time period this is about. Sometimes they list dates if something important happened on that date. I can also look for certain locations where things happen. I can look for just some facts about whatever the topic is, and I can also look for certain events that happened. And I know all of these historical details kind of make a historical account what it is. You can't have an informational text without at least a few of these details, without some of this information. So, keeping all that in mind, let's go ahead and at least look at the title of our passage. So, the title of this passage is Orphan Train Riders. So before I even start looking at my text, I can go ahead and kind of break down this title. I know an orphan is someone who either something has happened to their parents, or maybe they've been abandoned. They don't have a primary caregiver. They are orphaned, right? And so I know I've got orphan train riders. So just based off the title alone, maybe these orphans are going to be riding a train. I'm not entirely sure. So if you don't know anything about orphan train riders, you can already make assumptions just based on the title of this passage. So since this is a part 4, I am not going to read this to you. You're going to have to read this one on your own. But I'm going to kind of go ahead and talk about a couple of things with you before I turn you loose and let you do this. So, the first thing I want us to do together, I want us to make sure we look at our paragraphs. They're numbered for us, so I'm just going to circle the numbers to make sure I know exactly how many paragraphs I have. And for this passage, I have 5 paragraphs to read. So the next thing I want us to do is look at our study buddy. So the study buddy is going to tell us some important information as we read. So the study buddy says, because this is a historical account, I know that it contains true facts and historically accurate details. As I read, I'm going to focus on the historical events and people that are mentioned in the text. So, guys, what the study buddy is telling us is not anything new. We already knew this was a historical account, right? We already know that because it's a historical account, we can look for those historically accurate details. We can look for people, the dates, the time periods, the location, just facts, or maybe even events that are happening. So we already know that we can look for these things just because this is a historical account. So, what we are going to do next, I'm going to get you to read this passage once, just for understanding, and just to think about what the study buddy said. So I want you to read the passage once, and then when you come back, we are going to do the close readings. I'm gonna go over the close reading with you, tell you what to look for, and then you're gonna do that on your own. But first, I want you to read the passage once, just for understanding, and I want you to just think about what the study buddy says as you read. So go ahead and do that for me now, guys, and come back when you are finished. All right, so I am assuming that you are back and that you have read Orphan Train Riders, and hopefully, if you did not know anything about the Orphan Train or the Orphan Train Riders, hopefully you know a little bit more about it than you did before. Because this is an informational text, it's a historical account, we can learn from it. Everything in this passage is true, it's accurate, you can fact check it. So now that we've read this once, let's go ahead and look at our close reading box. We have 2, so let's do the first one. So, according to the first close reading, it says that we have to circle at least 3 details that help identify this passage as a historical account. So we know this is a historical account, right? We know it's real. We know it's informational. And we've already talked about those things that make it historical, right? So the people, the important historical figures, um, the historical events, the dates, the people that are involved, right? You can look for all of those things. So, what I want you to do next, guys, I want you to go back through the passage, and this time I want you to circle at least three of those details that make this a historical account. So think back to what we listed up at the top of the page. Think back to what the study buddy told you to look for, and I want you to find me three details that let us know this passage is a historical account. All right, so go ahead and do that for me now. When you finish, we will come back and we will go over the answers that I found. All right, so go ahead and get started for me. All right, guys, I am assuming that by now you are back because you have found at least three details that help us know that this is a historical account. So let's go ahead and go over the ones that I found. So the first thing that I circled was in paragraph number 1. I circled the sentence that says, by the mid 1800s, the New York City streets were filled with an estimated 30,000 poor and hungry children. I chose to circle this historical detail because not only does it give us the date that this was happening, it gives us an exact number, or really it's an estimated number. So in the mid 1800s, we know New York City was filled with at least 30,000 poor and hungry children. This is a historical fact or detail if I've ever seen one. It gives us a date, it gives us a location, and it lets us know who, right? Those 30,000 poor and hungry children. So we know that this is a historical fact. This is what makes this a historical account. So the second thing that I circled was at the beginning of paragraph 2. I circled in 1853, Charles Loring Brace, a young minister, took it upon himself to help these children. So I decided to circle this because it gives us the date, and I know dates are important, so I know the year is 1853. And this one also gives us a person. It gives us their exact name. We have Charles Loring Brace, and I know he was a young minister, and he was going to help the children, those 30,000 poor and hungry children. So this one, it gives us a date, it gives us a historical figure, that person, and it lets us know exactly who they are and what they are doing. So this is a historical detail that makes this a historical account. So the third detail I circled, and if you haven't noticed by now, I've circled more than three, so you have some options. So the third thing I circled was also in paragraph 2, and it's still about Charles Loring Brace, and it says Brace founded the Children's Aid Society, an organization, if I could talk, an organization devoted to moving children from the streets of New York City to new homes in rural areas across the country. So this is an important historical detail because it tells us exactly what Brace was doing. It tells us that he founded the Children's Aid Society. So the Children's Aid Society was basically like his organization, and it tells us exactly what that organization did, which was move children out of New York City into homes in more rural areas of the country. So this one is very important because it tells us what the Children's Aid Society does and why Brace founded it, or what its goal was at least. So this is a historical fact that kind of contributes to the fact that this is a historical account. So the fourth thing I circled was in paragraph 3. I circled that whole that first and second sentence. So later referred to as the orphan train movement, the first steps in this process was to load needy children onto what became known as orphan trains. The children were then transported to the 47 states and Canada. So this is letting us know that Children's Aid Society that was founded by Brace was later called the orphan train movement. That is a 100% fact. And then it tells us what those orphan trains did, and they were responsible for transporting all those needy kids to the 47 states and even to Canada, right? So this one, it tells us the name of an important movement in history. It tells us what the orphan trains were, right, and what they did, and then it tells us where they were headed. So it gives us a location, the name of an important movement, and then it just gives us some facts about the orphan train movement. So this is a very important historical detail as well. So the last thing I circled was at the very end of paragraph 5, and it says the orphan train movement was later considered to be the beginning of the foster care system. So this one is really important because it kind of lets us know what the orphan train movement kind of led to in the future. A lot of people, a lot of historians consider the orphan train movement to really be where foster care got its roots. So, like I said, this detail is super important to us knowing that this is a historical account. So, those were just some options, right? This passage is riddled with all kinds of historical details that you could have circled. These were just the ones I chose. So, if you circled something different, that's okay. As long as it's one of those important historical details, you are fine. So, now that we have done our first close reading box, let's move on to our second close reading box. The second close reading box says, underline the most important facts that the author presents about the orphan train movement. So we're looking for the most important facts. Look for details that answer who, what, when, where, why, and how. So those are the details that we are looking for. We want those important facts that let us know about the orphan train movement, but we want to look for specific details that tell us who. So people, they tell us what, which would be probably information about the orphan train movement. When, so you're looking for dates when things occurred, where it all happened, why it happened, and how it happened or how it had an impact. So, those are the details that you're looking for. So, it doesn't tell you a specific amount, but I want you to go through this whole passage and I just want you to see what you can find. And I'll go ahead and tell you it's possible that you'll underline stuff that we've already circled. And if that's the case, it's absolutely fine because some of those details are going to be important for this close reading box as well. So I want you to take a few minutes, go back through the passage, and underline those important facts that tell us who, what, when, where, why, and how. And you can come back when you are finished, and we will go over what I found. All right, guys, get to work. All right, guys, so I'm assuming that you are back. You have done your second close reading box by this point, and you have underlined those important details in the passage that tell us who, what, when, where, and why. So I have gone ahead and I have underlined what I thought was important. So let's go ahead and talk about my the things I underlined. So the first thing I underlined was that same section that I circled in paragraph 1, by the mid 1800s, New York City streets were filled with an estimated 30,000 poor and hungry children. So I circled this one because it tells me when, so the mid 1800s, it tells me where, New York City, and it tells me who, so those 30,000 poor and hungry children. So this one, it's got a lot of important facts, and they tell us who, what, when, where, and why. So I thought that it definitely should be underlined. So the second thing I underlined was in paragraph 2, a section of the sentence I already circled. I said Brace founded the Children's Aid Society. So this one tells me who, and what. So I know that Charles Loring Brace, he's an important person. He's the one who founded the Children's Aid Society. So the Children's Aid Society is what he founded. So this one answers who and what. So it's an important historical fact as well. The next thing I underlined was in paragraph 3, which is the orphan train movement. So the orphan train movement is what this whole passage is about, really. So it's important. So I underlined it. And I also underlined where it talks about the process of what happened with the orphan train movement. So the process was to load needy children onto what became known as orphan trains. The children were transported to 47 states and Canada. So this one tells me Um, what, where, and why. So this is very important. I know I already circled that, but it still has those important details that I needed to underline. All right, so the next thing I've got is in paragraph 4. I underlined the orphans were cleaned up and displayed on stage in front of curious crowds. So this tells me kind of what happened to the orphans when they got to where they were going and how they were displayed. They were cleaned up, right? Because if they were potentially going to get adopted, they had to be presented as their best. So I know that's an important historical fact as well. The next thing I underlined says some children ran away and some were abused. Others found supportive people whom they considered family for the rest of their lives. So this tells me what happened to some of the orphans after they were adopted, right? So this tells me who and what. So what happened? So I know some of the children ran away, some were abused. Uh but it kind of had a good outcome for some of the people, right? Some of the kids because they found supportive family. So that's an important historical detail as well. And then I also underlined most found the experience and transition to a new life to be difficult at best. So that's an important detail as well because it lets us know how those orphans kind of felt about the experience that they were having at that time. And then the last thing I underlined was in paragraph 5. I said the program resulted in positive outcomes. So, regardless of the lens you look at the orphan train movement, the program definitely had positive outcomes. The children who they were transporting were orphans. So, they didn't have the best lives possible. And I know some of them didn't have good lives after they were transported to the rural areas in the United States and Canada. But overall, the program did have positive outcomes regardless of how you look at it. And that's a fact that most historians can agree upon. All right, guys. So, like I said before, you may have underlined things a little bit different than I did. If you did, that's okay. Just you need to make sure that they answer who, what, when, where, why, or how. Okay, so that's going to wrap us up for our first passage, the Orphan Train Riders. So what we're going to do next, and I'm actually going to split this up into a second video, we're going to look at the next passage on page 213. So I'm going to stop the video right here so this one video doesn't get so long, and I want you to come back on the next video, part 2, and I want you to analyze this passage with me. All right, guys, I will see you then.